Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden which he and his disciples entered. And Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. And Judas, having received a detachment of troops and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, "Whom are you seeking?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. And when he had said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. And he asked them again, "Whom are you seeking?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I have told you that I am he. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way, that the saying might be fulfilled which he spoke, of those whom you've given me, I have lost none." And Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it, and struck the high priest's servant, and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. And so Jesus said to Peter, "Put up your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me?"
Carrying on with our studies looking through the Gospel of John, and I must say how much John 17 blessed me. Chapters that we're so familiar with, chapters that we think we know, and yet the light of God always brings out something new for us, doesn't it? And as we move now into chapter 18, Jesus has shared with his disciples in the earlier chapters. In chapter 17, he's prayed for his disciples. Time stands still for no man. And the hour that he had been dreading. And if you read the Gospel accounts, not necessarily what we find here in John, if you read the other Gospel accounts, you see the agony of the garden. You see, Jesus understood what the cross meant. We don't. Even now with hindsight, we don't understand what the cross meant. We know with hindsight the sufferings that Jesus went through physically. What we cannot enter into is the sufferings he entered into emotionally, spiritually. We have no insight. We can just but scratch the surface of what it meant for Christ to bear the sin of the world, for the sinless one to become sin for us, to know the judgment of a holy God upon his shoulders for our sin. We don't understand that. We can't understand that. But Jesus understood the horrors of the next day. He understood it more than we ever will. So how is he going to respond to that? Well, chapter 18 verse 1 tells us, when Jesus has spoken these words, what words? The words that we've already read, the teachings that we've seen in the chapters previous, the prayer that we've heard in chapter 17. When Jesus has spoken these words, he went out with his disciples. He stepped out. What did he step out of? He stepped out of the security of the upper room. He stepped out, ready to take the next step. He stepped out, as we sang earlier, into frailty, vulnerability. He stepped out, putting himself in a position where he could be betrayed and arrested. And he knew what that stepping out meant. But he went out. But what I love in verse 1 of chapter 18 is it tells us he went out with his disciples. You see, the comfort of friendship, the comfort of companionship, they were with him still. And they stayed true with him. Apart from Judas, the betrayer, all the others stayed true with him right up until the very last minute. He was surrounded by his friends. He went out with his disciples. They went over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. It's no coincidence that Jesus went into a garden before the betrayal. There's no coincidence with that at all. He's in the city, and he goes out of the city and he goes into a garden. Where did God place Adam and Eve? Did he place them in a well-lived area with all the conveniences of life around? No, he didn't. He placed them in a garden. He placed them in nature. We feel a connection with God in nature that you will never feel through a building. I can look at a building and I can appreciate the architecture, I can appreciate the thought that went into it, but ultimately it is a man who has made that. It is a man who has designed that. When I go out into nature, I see what God has created. I'm not looking at what man has made. And when you do come across man-made things, they can look nice, but they're never as good, are they? As lovely as the wedding venue was neat, they'd made those little pools and they'd made concrete causeways so the water could go down from one pool to another. And it was a lovely effect. But I can still see the concrete. I can still see the intervention of man. When I see a waterfall that nature has created, it inspires me so much more. You see, there is something about the connection through nature because we are in our Father's garden. We are observing the handiwork of God, His craftsmanship, His design. There is a quietness that we find in nature that we miss when we're in the middle of the bustling city. He was there and he went out to the garden. He needed to find a place of quietness. For the personal encounter that he was having at this time, he needed to find that quiet place. And even though his disciples had gone with him, he gradually pulls himself away from them. You see, as much as friends are good to have, as much as friendship and support is good to have, I can never, ever emphasize enough that our Christian walk is a personal relationship with Christ. And however much support and help we get from others, they can never walk your journey for you. They can never live your life for you. You have to find what God is calling you to. And there will be occasions when you need to strike out on your own on some things. There will be times when God is leading you. And we'll see that tonight. About the danger of following because somebody else is doing it. You need to know what God is calling you to do. And Jesus understood that as good as it was to have his friends with him, gradually first of all, he went away with just his 3 closest disciples. And then he even left them until he was alone with God. There are some things that we need, we just do business with God on our own. There are some prayers which aren't public. There are some prayers we can't even speak. But we need to find the time. So that is what John briefly tells us. And the other gospel accounts give us far more insight into that, but John doesn't. And I'm deliberately sticking with what John is telling us. And what else is going on when Jesus is there with his disciples, finding the quiet place? Well, Judas goes and he receives a detachment of troops. Judas is also surrounding himself with people of like mind, just as Jesus has surrounded himself with his disciples. Judas now goes to find those who will help him and be a support to him. He gets a detachment of troops and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees. And they now break into this quietness, into this solitude. And they appear with lanterns, torches, and weapons. What's the significance of that? Lanterns, torches, and weapons. They come with artificial light. Christ has declared himself to be the light of the world. They are there with artificial light. They are there with lanterns and with torches. And they are there with weapons. And that is artificial might. Artificial light and artificial might. It is what they believe they need. It is what they believe will give them an advantage in this situation. They believe that with their lanterns and torches they will be able to seek out a hiding, quivering, shaking, frightened prey. That is what they're thinking. They will need to bring lanterns and torches. It's a garden, it's dark, it's nighttime, we're going to have to seek him out. They come with weapons, we're going to have to be able to take him. How absurd all this is. He is the very Son of God. If he wanted to avoid them, he could. If he wanted to walk through their midst, he could. He'd already done it before. They came to throw him off the edge of a cliff once. He just walked through their midst. They couldn't touch him without the authority of God. It is an artificial setting with artificial thoughts. And they're artificial because they ignore the one who they actually come in to arrest. They have no idea as to who Jesus is. And that is obvious by what they bring. Their artificial light and their artificial might. What actually happens is totally different to what they assumed and thought. And life often does that to us, doesn't it? Verse 4, Jesus therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward. In verse 1, he went out. In verse 4, he goes forward. You see, he's not shrinking away from the confrontation. He's not hiding. He's not seeking to avoid. He's going forward. You see, he is never a victim of this. He is never a victim of this. He is always in control. Jesus went forward. And look carefully at what he says to them. It's so enlightening what Jesus says to them. Whom are you seeking? Who are you looking for? Who is it that you think you're coming to arrest? It's a question, isn't it? It's a question that all of us need to answer at some time in our life. Concerning Christ, well, who are we seeking? Who do we really think Jesus is? Whom are you seeking? And they answered him with the level of insight that they had received up to that time. They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Because that's who they believed they were arresting. That is who they believed they had come to capture. Jesus of Nazareth. And how does Jesus respond to that? In our Bibles, we miss it. Because in our translations, the actual response of Jesus has been added to. We have a 3-word response. I am he. But I can guarantee if you look in your Bibles, you will see that the he is in italics. What that means is the translator has added it to assist our learning. But in this case, it does the exact opposite. It doesn't assist us at all. It takes us away from the true meaning of the word. Jesus isn't there saying, I am he. I am Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus is there saying, I am. What's the significance of that? Well, you turn to Exodus chapter 3 to find the significance of that. Moses said, who shall I tell the people have sent me? And his answer is, I am who I am. The I am. And when Jesus says, I am, he's not just saying, I am the one, I am he. He is telling them who he really is. So much more than Jesus of Nazareth. The I am is who you have come to arrest. The I am is the one who you are seeking to bind. And that explains to us the effect of what Jesus says to them. Because in verse 6 it tells us, when he says to them, I am, take the he out, when he says to them, I am, they drew back and fell to the ground. Why did they draw back and fall to the ground? It's the authority of God that does that. You see, they are not in control. It is not them who are capturing him. It is he who is surrendering to them. Completely different thing. I am. And they now are powerless to do anything. Because it's not Jesus of Nazareth who stands before them. It is the very Son of God himself. And that explains to us why he asked them the question again in verse 7. Whom are you seeking? Do you see what he's saying? Do you really know who I am? Who is it that you're seeking? You think it's Jesus of Nazareth, but it's not. I just revealed to you, it's not. I have displayed to you, it's not. It's more than what you think. I am more than what you think. Whom are you seeking? And who do they respond? How do they respond in verse 7? Jesus of Nazareth. They still don't get it. They still don't see it. They still think they just come in to arrest a man. Jesus responds to them again in verse 8. I have told you that I am. You see, it's not that I am Jesus of Nazareth. I am. Therefore, if you seek me, if you want me, if you come for me, if you seek me, let these go their way. When have you ever seen anything like this? When a band of people with all their weapons and all their numerical superiority, they've turned up, and the one they come to arrest is dictating to them the terms under which he will allow them to arrest him? Because that's what you're seeing here. Jesus is dictating to them the circumstances under which he will submit to them. They have no authority here. He has the authority. He's never let go of that authority. If you seek me, let these go their way. In verse 1, he had the support and the knowledge of friendship. In verse 8, he makes sure that his friends are safe. It works both ways. He has benefited from their friendship, and he is sure to make sure that they do not get caught up in all of this. If you stop and think about it, a group of armed men come in to arrest the leader of another group of men in the middle of the night with weapons. That could have turned nasty very easily. The opportunity for confusion is huge. To be doing this at night is silly, but it's being done at night for a reason. The powers of darkness are at play at this moment in time, but they do not have authority here. Christ has authority. He said this, that the same would be fulfilled, that he himself had uttered to them earlier, of those whom you gave me I have lost none. That was part of his prayer. And he was making sure that their safety was taken care of. Who's the one, out of all of Jesus' disciples, who is the one most likely to be a bit of a loose cannon at this moment in time? Well, no surprises for guessing, it's Simon Peter, the impetuous one. But the one who is often the first to speak and the first to act. And somebody has to be first. And Simon Peter draws his sword. You see, Simon Peter was no coward when it came to a fight. Simon Peter is quite willing to fight for Christ. He's quite willing. Understanding that it could be his death, he is willing to do that. He draws the sword, and now I ask you, do you think Simon Peter has had some private lessons in swordsmanship? Do you believe that there, with a flick of the sword, he knocks off the ear of Malchus? Because that's what we read in verse 10. Simon Peter, having the sword, drew it, struck the high priest's servant, and cut off his right ear. What an incredible shot. What an incredible stroke. No, he's trying to clean him in half. He's trying to split his head open. He's a fisherman wielding a sword. He's missed. And he's caught him a glancing blow and cut off his ear. But in the providence of God he missed. Because there was to be no fight. He lops off his ear. We know from other gospel accounts that Christ heals it. And this is incredible, isn't it? He has declared himself as the great I am. And here he is, he places the ear back on that has been cut off, that should never have been cut off, there should never have been a fight. And he tells Peter, no, this isn't how it's to be. Put up your sword. Imagine the confusion on Peter's face. I thought we were to fight for you. You see, there are times we do need to fight for him. But as we sang earlier, it's meekness and majesty. It's meekness as well. There are times where gentleness is required. There is time where gentleness is strength. There is time when submission is right. Jesus said to him, put your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup? And this is the clue to everything, which my Father has given me. You see, they didn't understand what they were doing and who they were doing it to. Jesus understood it all. And he understood who was behind their actions. He understood that they were coming because they were motivated by the evil ones. But he understood more than that. He understood the Father's plan and the Father's heart. And he understood this was God's will. As difficult as the path was to be, this was God's way. And Jesus submits himself to their arrest. He is always in control. He is always the God of heaven. Whom are you seeking? Do you think it's Jesus of Nazareth? It's not. You're actually arresting God. The great I am is the one who stands before you, and it is he that you will drag